He wasn't on the official list. No flag escort, no rota clearance. Just a black SUV, a quiet approach down the side lane of Buckingham Palace, and the assumption that the doors would open, simply because of who he was. But what Donald Trump didn't realise was that in the palace, power doesn't move the guard, protocol does. So when he stepped into a corridor that wasn't his, and reached for a door sealed for custodial access, he met something no one had ever told him no with this much silence. Not a voice, not a shove, just a guard, still, unblinking, unmoved. And what happened next? It didn't make headlines, but it made history inside those walls. Now, before we show you the moment that stopped a former president in his tracks, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We read every single one. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. And stay right here. Because this time, the guard never said a word. And still, the door never opened. The last scheduled motorcade had already passed. Inside the Buckingham Palace forecourt, the shadows were beginning to stretch longer across the stone as a light winter haze settled above the towers. The air smelled faintly of polish and fuel, the kind of stillness that usually followed a full day of state briefings, garden receptions, and sealed diplomatic handshakes. Sergeant Lachlan Reddick stood post by the grand entry vestibule, a corridor that connected the ceremonial north entrance with the upper drawing rooms. It was a prime rotation, not because of traffic, but because of proximity. If something unexpected happened inside the main palace block, this was one of the places it might brush up against. He wasn't expecting anything today. The rota had been clear. A minor diplomatic dinner upstairs. Australia, Canada, New Zealand. Nothing involving heads of state, and certainly no unscheduled VIPs. So when the black SUV pulled up to the outer gate, flanked by a second vehicle with diplomatic plates but no clearance strobe, his posture sharpened slightly. The palace officer, stationed just beyond the iron bars, stepped forward. After a brief exchange through the tinted glass, he turned back and radioed the inner team. Vehicle stateside, claims prior walk-through approval, name given, Donald J. Trump. Inside the checkpoint vestibule, no one moved at first. A few seconds later, the radio crackled again. They say it was arranged verbally. Something about a heritage channel. No written request found. Reddick didn't respond. He didn't need to. The officer turned back to the car. Trump's aide stepped out, charcoal coat, tablet in hand, and approached the gate, gesturing toward the rotunda entrance. We were told this would be open. Just a short pass-through, not official, just a quick look. The president's previously been granted private viewing under a Commonwealth hospitality clause. But there was no clause. Not today. Not without rota clearance. Inside the vestibule, Reddick adjusted his left boot forward, slow, deliberate, and stepped directly into the archway. Not barring it, but claiming it. Trump's aide spotted him, nodded. "Sergeant, just need 5 minutes." Reddick didn't speak. Trump himself emerged next, red tie slightly askew, coat open, eyes scanning the stone arches overhead. "Beautiful place," he muttered. "Lot of history in these walls." He walked forward, right up to the line of entry, expecting it to part. It didn't. Reddick didn't blink, didn't shift. Trump turned, smiling. "You see this guy? Stone cold. I like that. But let's go ahead. We'll be out before anyone knows we were even in." He stepped forward, and Reddick, silent as ever, took one clean half step, positioning his polished boot directly into Trump's path. No words, no threat, just a perfectly clear refusal. The corridor fell still. Trump stopped. And for the first time in a long time, someone had told him no, without ever opening their mouth. Trump didn't step back, not right away. He turned to his aide, lips slightly parted, as if waiting for someone else to explain why a man in ceremonial red was suddenly dictating the flow of power. The aide shrugged, half apology, half confusion. The palace officer at the outer gate remained still, hands clasped at his belt, waiting for a decision he wasn't going to make. Behind the SUV, the second car door opened. A second aide stepped out, younger, nervous, holding a glossy portfolio and a folded printout of what looked like a museum invitation. He jogged forward, waving the document toward the vestibule. "It's here," he called out, breathless. "Heritage Access, Cultural Walkthrough, under Section 4, Legacy Interiors and State Holdings." Reddick didn't so much as glance at the paper. He'd seen that brochure before. It was public. A marketing handout distributed to tourists who booked Royal Gallery tours 3 months in advance. It had nothing to do with access to the inner corridors, and certainly no bearing on movement during custodial hours. Still, Trump gestured toward the younger aide. "See, it's official. This is all planned. It's a misunderstanding." From his position just inside the arch, Reddick finally spoke. Calm, low, audible only to those within 10 feet. "This entrance is sealed under state occupancy. No exceptions without record." The words hung in the cold air like the toll of a distant bell. Final. Unrushed. Utterly unimpressed. Trump blinked. Then he let out a short, dry laugh. "I've walked through more important doors than this, believe me." He stepped back, not in retreat, but as if to regroup, and turned to his aide. "Let's try the side gate. We'll go around. If this guy wants to play statue, let him." Reddick didn't follow. He remained precisely where he was, posture unmoving, gaze locked just past the shoulder of the now closing SUV door. But inside his left sleeve, beneath the crisp edge of his cuff, the discreet comlink embedded at his wrist buzzed softly. A quiet code. Protocol blue. Unscheduled VIP attempting movement. No rota match. Possible breach of ceremonial boundary. Across the palace's internal network, the alert echoed. Silent, contained, but live. Inside the lobby, the duty officer began triangulating camera feeds. A footman at the side vestibule double-checked the latch. Trump's convoy didn't circle around to the main gate again. Instead, it slid toward a narrow lane adjacent to the restoration wing, a section closed to the public, used only for maintenance deliveries and authorized walkthroughs. The vehicle paused. Trump emerged once more, this time moving with a deliberate air of entitlement. His aides followed closely behind. A third man, likely security, hovered near the rear bumper, eyes scanning for observers. There were none, at least not outside. But just beyond the far glass doors, a lone figure stood motionless, framed beneath the coat of arms carved into the marble lintel. Sergeant Reddick. He hadn't moved, because he already knew where they'd try next, and he was waiting for them. The side vestibule wasn't supposed to be open. Not at this hour, not today. But a catering crew, delayed by a loading dock issue, had just finished unloading silver service trays and linen-wrapped flatware for a Commonwealth dinner upstairs. One of the junior stewards, flustered by a dropped crate of charger plates, had propped the inner door open for just a moment too long. That moment was all it took. Trump's shoes echoed crisply as he stepped through the service corridor, a gleaming path of white marble, narrow and high-ceilinged, flanked by brass sconce lights and velvet-lined ropes. His breath fogged faintly in the cold air. One of the aides was filming already, casually from the hip, murmuring something about showing how history really lives behind the scenes. Inside the palace, this particular stretch was known as the Minister's Spine, a corridor used by officials to move discreetly between the grand staircase and private staterooms, the kind of hallway not marked on public maps but which held quiet authority in every brass handle and polished floor tile. Trump wasn't moving quickly. He wasn't rushing. He was occupying the space, shoulders back, coat open, pausing here and there to examine oil portraits and ceiling medallions, even brushing one framed velvet banner with his fingertips. "Place has better bones than the White House," he said. "I've always said that." From the far end of the corridor, a curator suddenly emerged from a side gallery. Lady Rutherford, hair pinned tight, tablet in hand, she stopped mid-step at the sight of the unscheduled entourage. She blinked twice. "You can't be in here." Trump turned. "We were waved in. Quick look around. Don't worry, we're not poking around the silver." She stepped forward. "This is a custodial zone, not on the tour circuit. No access is authorized without staff accompaniment." Trump smiled. Practiced, dismissive. Relax, it's me. We were told the Queen used this passage for private receptions, just getting a sense of it. She opened her mouth to reply, but she never got the chance, because at that moment, Sergeant Reddick appeared behind her. Framed perfectly between two Doric columns at the top of the next junction. He wasn't marching, he wasn't chasing, he simply materialized, still, planted. And once again, without raising a voice, without drawing a blade, he blocked the next step forward. The corridor suddenly felt tighter, quieter. Even Trump noticed it. The man in red, tall and unmoved, had become not an obstacle, but a verdict. "Come on," Trump said to no one in particular. "Are we doing this again?" He took one slow step forward, toward the junction that would lead, if unchecked, toward the white drawing room, a chamber sealed for internal refurbishment and strictly off-limits. But Reddick's weight shifted, imperceptibly, but enough. The glint of his bayonet caught the light. His right heel pivoted 1 degree. The message was clear. There was no further. Trump's smile faltered. Just slightly. He looked back at his aide. "This guy really doesn't blink, does he?" No one answered, because for the second time in 10 minutes, the most powerful man in the room was the one who hadn't said a single word. The sound of footsteps carried longer in this part of the palace. The ceilings stretched higher. The stone floors, waxed to a mirror sheen, amplified even the softest heel, let alone the brisk shuffle of a former US president pacing where no rota clearance had been logged. In the quiet operations suite below the Queen's gallery, a duty officer narrowed his eyes at the live corridor feed. One camera showed Trump standing barely a metre from a sealed doorway leading to the white drawing room. Another caught the subtle glint of red tunic and white crossbelt. Sergeant Reddick, motionless in profile. A silent alert lit up the corner of the console. Zone 4B violation, foreign VIP presence, no escort. The operator reached for his earpiece. "Ministry Command, this is Alpha Post. Confirm unauthorized presence in restricted interior corridor. Liaison team on standby. Guard has engaged. Awaiting further instruction." Back in the marble corridor, Trump stepped closer. Not to Reddick, but toward the sealed door behind him. He wasn't trying to open it, not yet, but his fingers hovered over the gilded trim as if proximity alone might unlock it. "Cameras watching?" he asked his aide in a low voice. The aide didn't respond. Trump turned toward the guard again, this time with a faint smirk. "You're not seriously going to stand there and pretend this matters?" Reddick said nothing. Trump took a step closer, closing the space now, as if testing the guard's leash. "You know who I am." Still nothing. "Let me tell you how this is going to go. You can either step aside and make this easy, or I make a call, and someone higher up explains the real meaning of hospitality." Reddick's gaze remained forward, but in that moment the mic beneath his collar activated. A quiet voice crackled in his ear. "Confirm containment posture. Liaison en route. Do not yield." Reddick blinked once, slowly, then replied, almost inaudibly, "Containment confirmed." Trump didn't hear it, but something shifted in the air. The kind of shift you feel when the room starts paying attention. From around the corner came the faint but deliberate rhythm of approaching boots. Measured, deliberate, ceremonial. Trump straightened. Finally, someone in charge. But it wasn't who he expected. A middle-aged man in a tailored morning coat stepped into view. Silver hair, blue sash, clipped tone. Sir Alistair Wainwright, Deputy Private Secretary to the Sovereign. He didn't rush. He didn't frown. He simply nodded once to Reddick, then looked at Trump. "Mr. President, may I ask what brings you to the private corridor?" Trump opened his arms like a showman. "Just saying hello to history." Wainwright glanced down at the aide's tablet. "There's no record of a walk-through request. This section is sealed. Custodial clearance is required for access." "Come on, Alistair," Trump said. "Don't go stiff on me now. We've met before." "We have," Wainwright replied evenly. "And that's precisely why I must enforce this boundary." Trump laughed, but no one joined in. Behind him, the aide slowly lowered the phone that had been recording. Reddick hadn't moved. Didn't need to. His presence alone had held the line. Now, protocol was catching up. The temperature in the corridor hadn't changed, but the energy had. With Sir Alistair Wainwright now standing between the sealed drawing room and the unscheduled entourage, something fundamental had shifted. Authority had stepped into the silence the guard had held for the last 15 minutes, and it spoke in clipped, unambiguous terms. "Mr. President," Wainwright said, voice measured, "for any non-scheduled access of state interior sections, particularly those undergoing preservation, clearance must come through the custodial registry or the Lord Chamberlain's office. Neither has received such a request." Trump didn't flinch. He put on that familiar half-smile, the one that blurred charm with challenge. "You know how these things go, Alistair. Calls are made, things don't always get written down." Wainwright nodded once. "And when they aren't written down, sir, they aren't remembered in these halls." The silence that followed was tight. One of Trump's aides tried to recover ground. This was meant to be a light, informal walkthrough, part of the president's goodwill itinerary. We understood it had been cleared verbally, possibly through the Heritage Trust liaison. "No such liaison holds authority over movement inside sealed Crown interior," Wainwright interrupted, still without raising his voice, "especially not during custodial hours." Trump turned back to the corridor behind him and realized something he hadn't noticed before. The guard hadn't moved, still standing, still watching, still between him and the sealed door. Trump approached again, now not out of defiance but calculation. He stopped just short of Reddick's position, looking him over like a problem he couldn't quite solve. "I don't know what they pay you," Trump said quietly, "but you're good at this. I'll give you that." Reddick didn't blink. "Seriously, not a twitch. Do you ever move?" Silence. "Maybe you should come work my detail. We could use someone who doesn't flinch when the pressure's on." Still nothing. Trump exhaled, more performative than anything, then turned back to Wainwright. "All right," he said finally. "I get it. Protocol wins." He took a deliberate step back. "Guess I'm not on the guest list tonight." The line was meant to be light, but the only response was a subtle nod from Wainwright. Trump turned to leave, gesturing for his aides to follow. The camera phone disappeared into a pocket. One security officer muttered something under his breath, but just before the former president cleared the corridor, he looked back over his shoulder at Reddick. The guard hadn't spoken a word, hadn't made a dramatic gesture, hadn't even raised a hand. And yet, he'd won. Not through confrontation, but through stillness. That's what Trump would remember. Not the lecture, not the policy talk. The wall that wouldn't move. By the time the group reached the north vestibule, the light had changed. A thin drizzle had begun outside. Rain beaded along the cast-iron lampposts lining the forecourt. The flag above the palace stirred faintly in the evening wind. Trump stepped through the open arch, adjusting the cuff of his overcoat as if to reclaim some tempo. The aides followed closely behind, silent now, their earlier confidence curdled into careful neutrality. The press staffer kept his phone away this time, not by order, but instinct. Sergeant Reddick followed a few paces behind, not escorting, not confronting, just witnessing, as was procedure. Across the court, a lone photographer, credentialed for exterior shots of the Commonwealth dinner arrivals, noticed movement that wasn't on his press briefing. He raised his lens instinctively. Click. The frame froze mid-motion, Trump exiting with his coat flaring slightly, a pair of aides flanking him, and behind them, perfectly centred, a tall royal guard in full ceremonial posture, red tunic, bayonet fixed, chin lifted. The photo would be uploaded within the hour. The caption would read, "Uninvited guest at the palace." But inside the forecourt, none of that had landed yet. Trump turned toward his car. The door was already open, held by his driver. The raindrops dotted the polished roof. "Didn't expect a welcoming committee," he muttered. His aide, quiet, responded carefully. "Sir, probably best to call it a mix-up." Trump paused at the edge of the car. Mix up? The aide nodded. We'll frame it that way. Missed signals, misunderstanding, nothing aggressive. Trump looked across the courtyard once more, toward the windows, the sealed corridor, and beyond that, the silent figure who hadn't moved the entire time. Reddick had now resumed his post at the side arch. Same bearing, same silence. Trump's hand tightened on the doorframe. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an honor misunderstanding. Big difference. He dropped into the car. The door closed. Engines started. The convoy rolled forward, tires brushing lightly through the mist, pooling along the cobblestones. Back inside, Reddick stepped out of view and into the vestibule alcove. He reached for the logbook clipped near the interior sentry box and wrote 6 words. Attempted entry, blocked, no escalation required. He didn't note who it was, didn't need to. The record would hold. The guard room at Buckingham wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. Low stone arches, dark wood benches, and the quiet rustle of polished leather and wool. It was a place of routine, not recognition. Sergeant Reddick removed his bearskin in silence, setting it carefully on the carved stand in the corner. His bayonet was already sheathed, his gloves folded neatly inside his belt. Another guard, younger, posted on rear relief, offered a sideways glance as Reddick walked past. "That was him, wasn't it?" the younger guard said quietly. Reddick didn't respond. He reached for the kettle, poured a measured line of steaming water into a white mug, and took his seat by the window. The rain had picked up slightly, tracing thin streaks down the glass. The officer of the watch entered a moment later, a clipboard tucked under one arm. He didn't look dramatic, didn't clear his throat. He just sat across from Reddick, opened the top sheet, and reviewed the single sentence inside. Attempted entry, the officer read aloud. Blocked, no escalation required. He looked up. Clean. Reddick nodded. The officer scribbled an initial beside the line. Palace Command has reviewed. You're in the clear. Deputy Private Secretary passed along word as well. Said to relay commendable adherence to protocol. He paused, then added, for what it's worth. Reddick didn't react. The officer closed the file, stood and left. Across the room, another guardsman, older, with sharp cheekbones and a scar running from temple to jaw, smirked faintly as he leaned back on the bench. You didn't even raise your voice, he said, half admiring. Reddick took a slow sip from his mug. Didn't need to. Outside, the rain rolled steady now. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, the American convoy was already gone. Inside, the rota was back in order. The corridor had returned to silence. The log was closed. And for those who knew what to look for, a new understanding had settled over the palace, not one written in headlines or declarations, but in posture and memory. By morning, the tabloids had found their spin. Trump turned away at palace gates. Security misunderstanding, palace silent. Royal Guard stands ground against former president. None of them were entirely wrong, but none of them had the full picture either. Inside Buckingham, no press statement was issued, no disciplinary reviews, no official mention of names. The rota remained sealed, the logs archived, the corridor untouched. But in the palace's private rhythm, stories moved faster than ink. A steward from the north vestibule quietly mentioned it over tea. An archivist whispered it to a cleaner. A kitchen porter passed it on to a footman. And just before the end of the day, as the ceremonial shift rotated for evening placement, a small group of tourists paused at the outer forecourt, eyes following a single guardsman stationed by the arch. That's him, one of them whispered, the one who stopped him. They didn't say who. They didn't need to. Sergeant Lachlan Reddick didn't glance their way. He stood motionless, bearing steady, rifle cradled with ceremonial precision. He hadn't spoken a single word that made the papers. He hadn't needed a podium, or permission, or applause. But in the stillness of that moment, in the silence that never wavered, something older than titles had spoken for him, discipline, legacy, and the quiet certainty that some doors aren't opened by power, but held closed by duty. Would you have stood your ground if someone like Trump tried to push past? Do you think Sergeant Reddick did the right thing, or should he have stepped aside for diplomacy's sake? And if it had been you behind that sealed corridor, would you have moved? If you believe some doors should never open without honour, tap like. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on. We upload stories like this every single day. And share this video with someone who still believes protocol matters more than personality. Our other Royal Guard stories are already on screen. Go ahead and watch them next. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, right here.